Hello and welcome to Hope TV, this segment of Sound Mind. My name is Brian and I am so happy to be here with you today. Thank you much for coming to the conversation. Listen, Jesus says, I want your soul to be at health as well as your physical body. And we see that our soul is just that inward spirit being. It includes your heart and your mind as well. And listen, this is what this show is about. We want to, as a family of believers and community, come together to talk about the things that are important. And one of those is our mental and emotional health. I want to give a shout out to our senior pastor, executive director, Dr. E. Dewey Smith Jr. for his vision for Sound Mind. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. We're grateful for all that you do. And to you, our viewers, thank you so much for coming in week after week, tuning in. We hope this information is helpful. We want to know where you're from today, city, state. Thank you so much for watching. And then we want you to share it with at least 5 people. I need you to do that for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mama, brother, cousin, auntie, that chat thread, whatever you got, share it, because we have another amazing segment. We're going to be doing part from our last time, and it's going to be so dynamic. Before we begin that, I want to give a special shout out also to those people behind the Hope TV. Those are our individuals who help with our tapings, that are beside the scenes, our assistant producers. Thank you so much for all you do. We couldn't do this without you. Now, without further ado, I want to bring back our guest from last time, Dr. Winfrey, who's been doing this for 24 plus in mental health services as a counselor. He has been a clinical business human resources consultant trainer. He is the lead trainer, lead therapist for House of Hope Atlanta. He is married to his elementary school crush, and he has 4 beautiful children. Please welcome to our segment of Sound Mind today, Dr. Gideon Winfrey.
Hey there.
Hey, my brother. How you doing?
Oh, blessed, brother. So glad to see you one more time. Thank you for having me back.
So happy to have you here. Listen, our talk was so phenomenal last time. A talk about hatred. I think we really were able to take away some moments that helped us throughout our week, and it's really helping to change our lives. Now, Dr. Winfrey, last time you were here, we shared with our audience that you were offering some 30-minute talk sessions so that we could clear our minds and our hearts. That link is on the screen again, and we're going to offer that again this week. Dr. Winfrey, would you share a little information about that?
Yes, the initiative at the beginning of Hope, when we started this partnership with Hope TV, was based on just giving everybody who wanted, within a reasonable confine, just the ability to be heard. So that's why it's entitled Someone's Listening. It's not as in-depth as traditional therapy, but it's just to give people a 30-minute opportunity just to say what's on their heart, on their mind. If nothing else, gives them the opportunity to clear some of the closet space that feelings and emotion tends to occupy, just to help them recalibrate. And if it leads to therapy, if not with me, with somebody else, then God be the glory and blessing to them to be able to live a fuller life.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Winfrey. Family, friends, you see the link there on your screen. The first 5 people that fill out that link, you will receive that free session with Dr. Winfrey, and we're definitely excited about that opportunity. So, Dr. Winfrey, thank you for letting us come and sit on your couch again this week. We're excited about it. Last time on your couch, we talked about hatred, working through hatred. You gave us the 4 steps and processes of working through that. I want to move that conversation forward a little bit and talk about an F word that a lot of us have problems with. And no, it's not a 4-letter F word. The word is forgiveness. And I'm sure there's some people on the other side of the screen that you've already cringed when you heard that F word, because it is difficult at times. Dr. Winfrey, can you walk us through getting from hatred to forgiveness?
Okay. Getting from hatred to forgiveness is a conscious decision that a person has to make. And the unfortunate thing about that, good brother, is that some people are ironically at peace at what I call living in a state of organized chaos and confusion, meaning that
Mm,
there's so much chaos and confusion that it's become their norm, that anything that counters that is actually a place that they don't want to go. So some people can live their entire life in a state of hatred because, again, it justifies them to be the way that they are without them having to do the work of self. But when one looks at their life and they look at the impairment and the decompensation and the devaluing and the absolute waste that hatred has and one that harbors it, one just has to evaluate the overall impact that that has and make a decision as into wanting to be in a better place, wanting to be released. So forgiveness
mm.
is actually the precursor to release. You can't have release without forgiveness.
Whew. You can't have release without forgiveness. So why is forgiveness so tough for us?
Forgiveness is tough because, again, it goes back to a concept that I constantly use in my practice. It requires us to have the difficult, or in some cases, what I call the adult conversations. And the adult conversation is a terminology that I coined to basically mean all the conversations we don't want to have, that being an
Mm,
adult requires us to have. And with forgiveness, it means that there are conversations and reflections that have to be had where you may recognize that it's not a one that the issue may be a dual dynamic. It may be a didactic dynamic, meaning that the other person legitimately may not be as wrong as you thought they were, and that it could have actually been you.
mm,
So instead of facing oneself, it's just easier to manufacture a hatred because that way we can recreate the factors that allow us to operate in a state of mental and emotional imbalance.
that's good. That's good. So let's talk about ourselves and being able to see. Last time we talked, you told us that it is important to hear what it is before we tell someone what it is not. So when we've been the one that was wrong or whatever has happened that caused us to have hatred in our hearts, how do we begin to have the heart to even open up and listen? I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Renfrey. Once you get me once, it's a little hard to go back and have that conversation. And I know you look from both the spectrum of spirituality and counseling. So help us walk through opening our ears and our heart, be able to even listen to the other side.
Well, the one thing that I think helps that process begin is having self insight. Any type of change that we want to make in our life is always going to start with ourselves. It's not our education, it's not our genealogy, it's not our psychology or our theology. It is self. It has to start with self. And it has to start with the individuals looking and being able to take an assessment of their life and yielding to that feeling of something being incomplete, something being out of balance. And again, having those self conversations to say, I don't like the quality of life that I'm experiencing. And if there is a better, why am I denying myself that? So a lot of times before we can usher forgiveness to others, we have to be willing to usher forgiveness to ourselves. And again, when the work of self comes into question, that's typically where people become stagnant and resistant.
Forgiving ourselves. But it shouldn't be hard, like, to forgive ourselves. Like, I mean, is there a possibility that we can be the victim and still not forgive ourselves?
Yes, because there's the questioning of the reenactment of the situations that led to us being in a victim's perspective. So a lot of times the energy and effort that goes into reprocessing, it has its place in therapeutic growth, but then it also can be a waste because you start having the shoulda, woulda, couldas instead of what I ought
Mm,
and what I brought and what I need to become.
mhm,
So a lot of
mhm,
times we get stuck and years go by. Well, I shouldn't have dated this person. I shouldn't have did this. I shouldn't have done that. And that has its place, but until we can take that and translate that into the action steps of today so that we can live the life that we want to have tomorrow and allowing us to say, hey, that's where I was at that time in my life. I'm okay with that. Or as I like to say, um, sometimes you have to not leave a forwarding address for the issues of yesterday. And if you don't live at that address anymore, then if somebody sends you mail and they don't have a forwarding address, then that mail never comes to you. So sometimes we leave a forwarding address from where we used to be, and sometimes we should just leave that to that particular address, meaning that whatever happened that is relevant to that place and that residency at that time, I don't live there anymore, and I'm okay with that.
Mm. That's good. That's good. So I want to kind of turn this conversation into place because Dr. Winfrey, when the Botham Jean case happened last year in Dallas, Texas, and even now with what we're seeing with Black Lives Matters, there has been a large conversation that Christians, specifically Black Christians, are too forgiving. Can you help us wrestle with that nuance, that thought process there?
Well, a couple of things comes to mind, good brother, when you say that, because one thing that automatically comes to my mind is two things. Always the establishment of what I call an operational definition. An operational definition is what is the definition that we all are agreeing on so that we can go forward using a term and a terminology that we're all in agreement of. So when you say forgiveness, that has a lot of different definitions depending on the population and depending on who's at the table having the conversation. So
Okay.
before we can even talk about being too forgiving, then we have to look at collaboratively how we defining forgiving. And once we can have
Mm,
that conversation, then we have to also look at who's our audience. Who's our audience? So a lot of times, until we have a definition and then have an idea or respect of the audience, then we can engage in those conversations where we can get clarity on where we can either agree or disagree. A lot of times, it's been said that we as African Americans, Hebrew people, are too forgiving, and there's no way, in my opinion, that one can be too forgiving. But sometimes you can be too lax in your forgiving that you end up putting yourself in the same position again. Because how can we be too forgiving when we come from a forgiving God? The very principle of salvation
mm,
is forgiveness. And so if you put the two in front of it, that's almost like saying that what God extended us himself, and what we are called upon as really ambassadors of the kingdom and embassies of the kingdom. It's almost as if saying that the very thing that God extended to us, we, as his image bearers, we can't extend that to others without maintaining our respective place and our respective boundaries. And that's where it gets cloudy. There's no such thing as being too
mhm.
forgiving, but you can be too lax in your forgiving. Thus, recreating an
Okay,
environment where the same offense can't happen again.
gotcha. Now I'm gonna tell you, there's some people that's probably sitting out there right now, Dr. Winfrey, that's like, well, I'm not God. I don't have that kind of forgiveness in me.
Mm-hmm.
You gave
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm not Jesus. What do we say even in that moment? Because I'll be honest with you, Dr. Winfrey, there are some people that I have come across that it is hard even today to express forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing, though. With forgiveness doesn't even have to be expressed. It just has to be. It has to be. It has to be extended. You can forgive
Mm,
someone and never have a conversation with them, because what forgiveness does is that it releases you from the offense. And a lot of times when
mm,
we think of forgiveness, we have this plan of how we think it should look. Forgiveness just means that there's been an acknowledgement of an offense, an acknowledgement of the impact, and it is the effort of either one individual or multiple individuals to, in light of that offense, to move on and have a state of balance in their own life. Or if multiple people choose to be a part of that process, then everybody's collective life. But I don't need you to accept my forgiveness in order for me to forgive you and move on.
mm. Woo! That's good, Dr. Winfrey. That's good because that's what we hear. Most of the times when we hear conversations about forgiveness, we have in our mind that it's this formal apology. I got to call them. I got to write them a letter. It's going to be mushy gushy. And from what I'm hearing from you is that's not even a realistic expectation to start off with.
No, it's not. And the beautiful thing about that from a spiritual regard is that God Himself He forgave us before we even asked for it. So if you look at it from a spiritual, from a sacred regard, then that's that example. But for those of that want to look at it from a secular regard, then I have an answer for that too. One thing that I utilize in my own life, and I do this with those that I work with in therapy. I always have individuals ask this question whenever there's a life dynamic, when they feel as if they want to respond or react, if they're holding on to something. I always tell individuals to ask themselves the question, is this worth my kingdom or my queendom? Is it worth my kingdom or my queendom? And when you have that
Mm,
mindset, anything that you've been given a governance over, which is your mind, your heart, your relationship, that's your kingdom, that's your queendom. And is this individual worth you compromising that space, that God-given place of refuge that you have? Is it worth that to you? And if it's worth that to you, then don't usher to forgiveness. But here's the thing. But be mindful that you have somebody living in your space that's not contributing to you expanding your territory, which is why we're here. So if that's worth that to you, and see, here's where the therapy part comes in at. You have to be able to answer those questions. Some people might be like, well, it's worth that to me. Well, if it's worth that to you, then I acknowledge where you are and I can accept that. And then that teaches me how to integrate, how to integrate with you based on where you are. But then also, a lot of times with forgiveness is what I try to get people to understand is that sometimes you have to look at the spirit behind the person. And when you look at it
mhm,
as far as the spirit behind the person and have an understanding for what their life journey has been, that desire to for them to be apologetic will start to become compassion that you have because you start to look at their life journey and you see their lack of forgiveness and what it made them. So the question that one has to ask
mhm.
is, do I want to become what it is that I'm seeing from someone else? Is that worth my kingdom or my queendom?
I just had a whole session right here on this segment. Like you just helped free me from some own unforgiveness in my life. A big sister of mine from Dallas, Texas, her name is Kokisha Bailey Robinson. Hey, sis. She used a statement. She says, forgiveness is a day-to-day decision. You can forgive
Mm-hmm.
today, and then tomorrow that emotion can come right back. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have to make that effort again to work through forgiveness. Can you
Mm-hmm.
help us while we're sitting here on your couch, Dr. Wynn? Can you sit here and walk us through maybe the stages of forgiveness, or like once we have kind of reconciled within ourselves and we are ready to do the work of forgiveness, where do we move from there as it pertains to being in relationship with people that we've forgiven?
Mm-hmm. The way that we move through that, good brother, is I liken that as into sitting at a table. And sometimes with forgiveness or looking at there being an expectance of an apology, we see ourselves as the person that's sitting at the table while everybody else is walking by, looking at us, asking us why we're sitting at the table. So after you sat at the table for so long, you have to say to yourself, why am I the only one at this table? And when you get
Mm,
up from the table, everybody that is relevant to you in your life has a seat at that table. So if you get up from that table, your seat is there. It doesn't mean um, that you're not forgiving or that you don't care. It just means that there's a life that you want to live for yourself. And in that process,
mhm,
meaning that I will always have a seat at the table. And if anybody else is ever sitting at this table that I will periodically look at, then I'll be the first one to want to sit down. But in the meantime, in between time, I have to move forward, understanding that if the situation ever presents itself and we can have a conversation about it, then we'll be able to engage in a mutual forgiveness. But
mhm.
with But what your big sister said was exactly on point, because forgiveness is a everyday decision, and the beautiful part about that is that God gives us that provision even in the Lord's prayer when we say, "Give us our daily bread," meaning that everything we need for that day, He's already given us. And so instead of allowing our mind to think about how the person might see us and how it may look, don't care about that. This is about self freedom and self release. So what that means for me is I have to be understanding that this is my release, and that when I experience certain thoughts, and again, here's where the work of self comes in at. When I have certain thoughts, then I have to be able to say, I made a decision out of forgiveness to not go
Mm-hmm.
back into that place. I'm not concerned
Mm-hmm.
about what it looks like to you. I'm not concerned about what you say to me. Again, I'm not giving you that kind of real estate in my kingdom or my queendom. And when you just rehearse that day in and day out, and sometimes you have to cue yourself for forgiveness, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes you have to have physical markers in place so that you can be reminded to not respond from an emotional, impulsive, or fleshly regard. Let me give an example of that. There are certain people that if we have to interact with, sometimes we need help and reminders to move forward in our forgiveness. That might mean that it may be certain people that you may have a certain ringtone for when they call, and you might change their name to when they call you. You might have it programmed in your phone, forgiveness, already forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already prompted yourself before you even enter into that engagement what the dynamic
Mm-hmm.
is. You've already decided what the outcome was going to be. So regardless of what the interaction is, you're approaching it from a forgiveness regard. So now you're learning a new way of interacting with them that's minus the forgiveness while doing the work of self and freeing yourself.
Now, I want to ask a question. Um, in light of what's happening right now in our world with Black Lives Matter, racism, social injustice all across the world, um, how do we start to forgive? Because a large part of, I would say, our community, we in some way rightfully are upset and hurt from things that happened for decades and centuries. How do we do, what does that work, in your opinion, of forgiveness look like so that we aren't fueled daily with that rage and emotion?
What that looks like, brother, is being able to look at what I call inverted processing. And what inverted
Mm,
processing is when I take the thing that I see that's hurtful and I do the complete opposite as far as my understanding of that. So when I look at
mm,
how our people have been treated, and I think about all of the vile things that have been done to us, but when I look at all of the advancements of our people, when I look at
mhm,
over a 400-year period to be taken from the native land, stripped of our language, stripped of our original manner of worship, and become the very foundation that this country was built on, to be able to
mhm,
look and say, in spite of everything that you tried to do, you couldn't kill me. So because of that resiliency and that shifting, it allows me to move forward with you, but not putting you in a position or reinstating you in a position of authority, because now I see that we are equals and we're peers. So for us
mhm,
as a people, we have to be careful not to recycle the pains of the past, because if we recycle the pains
mm,
of the past over and over, then we continually put the oppressor in their position to oppress. But when we look at
mhm,
it in terms of in spite of, I'm still here, and now that I'm conscious of my place and conscious of my own self quality, I don't want to become you. You treated
mhm,
me that way because of what's inside of you. And if I'm not careful, I can become the very thing that I so despise. So out of goodness for myself, I forgive you. Now here's the thing. Forgiveness doesn't mean reinstatement. It doesn't mean
mm,
putting back in a position that was once there. It just means that now that I'm aware of our dynamics, I've accepted it, and I'm moving forward, and I'm thanking you for the acknowledgement of who you are and how you view me. But based
Mm-hmm.
on that, now I can operate in a spirit of truth because I'm aware of exactly how you feel about me. But then also something that's important, good brother, for our people, we have to be mindful of not picking and choosing when we want to be offended. That is an issue.
Woo!
It's hard to have forgiveness when you're selective in your offenses and how you respond to them. You
Break
can't
that
you
down for
can't
us.
say you can't be you can't be well, I'm going to say this as a husband and as a father. You can't be screaming Black Lives Matters, but you're mistreating your wife and not taking care of your children. You can't. It doesn't work that way because your truth is circumstantial. So I can't have forgiveness until I have truth. So one thing
Mm,
about us as a people is that we love to pick and choose when we're offended. And
mm,
so we have to set the standard for ourselves. And when we set the standard for ourselves, then we elevate above our oppressor and we elevate over the systemic dynamics because we're still going to be great because we're God's chosen and because of what's naturally in us. So you can't
mm-hmm.
you can't march. You can't march throughout the city to protest, but you can't sit down in a state of peace with the child, with the mother of your child or the father of your child. So it
Mm-hmm.
starts here. And a lot of times with the protests that you see, is not so much about the offense, it's more so about how can I use this as a way to express my own individual frustrations. It gives me an outlet and a distraction from dealing with the real issues because I haven't forgiven myself first.
Mm. Whew. I don't know about y'all out there, but Dr. Winfrey has just worn me out. Dr. Winfrey, you almost remind me of the parable of the man who owed money and he was released from his debt and then turned around and hemmed
Mm-hmm.
somebody up for something
Mm-hmm.
much less but gave a larger
Mm-hmm.
consequence. I think that that's what happens even in
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness. We tend to sometimes be mad and unforgiving with people for the very exact thing that we're
Mm-hmm.
mad at them about. I know our
Mm-hmm.
time is running thin, and I don't know about y'all, but I've been enjoying myself on Dr. Winfrey's couch today. Dr. Winfrey, talk about in that example of the father or the parent. There's a lot of tension in our families with unforgiveness, holding in anger, holding in hostility, holding in resentment. Um, what would you say to us who are battling with forgiveness with family members, specifically in that intimate core?
What I would say is a lot of times the anger that we have in our families is actually anger that we inherited it, and we didn't even know we inherited it from our parents, how they were raised, the fact that we didn't have a
Mm,
lot of conversations about feelings and emotions, so we didn't know how to package it. When there was a misunderstanding, when there was a death, when there was an incarceration, when there was an absence, we never talked about it. So a lot of times with us as a people, particularly us, and particularly as males, we struggle with the expression of our emotions because we never want to be seen weak or being vulnerable. And as a result, all of that builds up. And when there is one small conflict, it becomes so potent and concentrated that it goes out and it comes across as if there's been literally years and years of hatred because that's literally what it was. And we didn't even recognize it to be what it was. We didn't recognize that these were the sins of our fathers and mothers. And until we're able to stop and say, wait a second, this isn't emotionally healthy. This is not where I want to be. And until a person makes that decision to really look at their lineage. And the main thing that I always tell people to do is to look at the quality of life that you had and ask yourself, is this what I would want for my children? Somebody has to
mm,
be, as I like to call the lineage's sacrificial lamb. In my family, I was the sacrificial lamb as far as my father's side of the family, meaning that I had to look at the men in my family and say, I don't believe that this is exactly how they want it to be, but then I have to look at the dynamics and be able to say, okay, well, I understand why it happened that way. But in that understanding, it doesn't mean that moving forward it has to be that way. So somebody has to be clutch. Somebody has to be the one to say it stops with me. I'm gonna do the work that I need to do to make certain that moving forward, our bloodline has a spirit of openness and forgiveness and having those conversations. And you may not be able to have those conversations with those actual family members, but that's why the church is here. That's why individuals like myself are here, just for you to get to a place that you can be able to sleep at night. And that's really what the process is about freeing yourself emotionally. Now, that doesn't mean being reckless, because some people can be like, well, I forgive, I moved on with my life. And you can always tell when a person has forgiven because they don't feel the need to justify their wrongness. If you're justifying your wrongness, you haven't forgiven. If you keep
Yep.
talking about it, you haven't forgiven. Or understanding that when a person offends you, it's because they're trying to bait the old you. And when you no
Mm.
longer take the bait, you no longer become the catch.
Huh? Not ready for that. Y'all not ready for that one. That's a good. Can you repeat that again for us, Dr. Winfrey?
When you no longer take the bait, you no longer become the catch.
You no longer become the catch. Dr. Winfrey, it's like when we get on here, our time just slips away. Dr. Winfrey, you've helped us walk through it to the path of forgiveness. As we go away for this week, leaving your couch today, are there some final words you can give us as we process through this journey of forgiveness?
Okay. What I would say in closing, good brother, is take an assessment of the value of your own life and just really look at yourself and say to yourself, is this the superlative of my life? Is this the best it's ever going to be? And is my quality of life tied to something that's not even in my circumference and sphere any longer? And if you are honest with yourself and you want God's greatest for yourself, then get in relationship with God. Get in relationship with yourself. Cry the tears that
Mhm.
need to be cried. Say the things even if those individuals don't want to listen to you, say them out loud. Write them out. Write them out and put it on the grill and burn it. But make a conscious decision that people will no longer live in your kingdom without an accountability, and free yourself from it so that you can make way for the people that God intended to have in your life, that will be, as I like to say, complementary companions. People
Mhm.
that want to come into your life can't come into your life if those spaces are being harbored by forgiveness and resentment. And the reason why that is because until you clear that space, God isn't going to send his grace. Until you clear that space,
Mm.
God isn't going to send his grace.
Dr. Thank you so much for being with us. Family, I hope you've enjoyed Dr. Winfrey. Once again, if you are interested in that 30-minute talk to speak your mind with Dr. Winfrey, because someone's listening and he wants to give you that opportunity. Follow that's on the screen right now. Type that in. The first 5 people will get that 30-minute opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Winfrey. Thank you so much again, sir. We are so appreciative to you, and we will definitely be having you back here on Sound Mind again. Well, family and friends, until next time, I want you to protect your heart and your mind. Do the work. Ask yourselves those questions. And like Dr. Winfrey said, cry the tears you need to cry. There is real estate that you have mentally and emotionally that God has given you, and you need to do the best with it. Until next time, keep a sound mind.